Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Science Summit at the UN General Assembly. My name is Brian Lung. I am part of the Belmont Forum Secretariat, and you are here because we are here talking about transdisciplinary approaches to work across different contexts. So looking at transdisciplinary case studies from around the world. We have an exciting lineup of guests. We have a president from TSRI. We also have a program director from the Drexel University in the US. And we have two other researchers who do transdisciplinary research, one in Madagascar and one who does transdisciplinary training in Brazil. So we have an exciting lineup today, and I'm very glad that you are all here able to join us. For those who just joined, my name is Brian Lung. I am the Belmont Forum Secretariat, and you're here today for the Science Summit at the UN General Assembly. And in short, today we're going to have a conversation with our panelists to talk about their transdisciplinary approaches and also diving into some of the best practices and some of the challenges that they've encountered along the way. I understand that English may not be first language for everyone. So what I wanted to do and take this opportunity is to remind everyone that in this Zoom window, we have a option where you can click on something called closed captions, and that will provide an automated English, transcription for you all. And I am going to try to speak at this pace, and hopefully it's helpful for everyone. During the course of the conversation, if you have any questions or if you want to ask anything to our panelists, feel free to drop it into the chat. I am one of the moderators, so I'll be going through the questions and the thoughts that you may have, and we'll go from there. If there's no other questions in terms of the session, I think I'll start. And I see that we have some other people joining one more time. My name is Brian Lung. I am the Belmont Forum Secretariat. And the Belmont Forum is an international organization that tries to tackle transdisciplinary projects, and we try to fund them through the Belmont Forum process. It includes international scientific agencies that come together to tackle global challenges, in particular climate change. And we really heavily focus on the transdisciplinary process because ultimately, at the end of the day, what we really want to do is bring science to action for the community, action for decision makers, and to make real meaningful change. And that's our goal, hopefully. And so to begin our session, I'm going to pass the floor to one of my colleagues, Fanny Ramos-Quispe, who's going to go into a little session trying to figure out how everyone here is thinking about the process of transdisciplinary research and what transdisciplinary research means to you. So Fanny, if I could pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everyone. I'm Fanny Ramos-Quispe, also part of the Belmont Forum Secretariat. And we want to start this session with a small brainstorming with all of you to think about what comes first to your mind when you think about transdisciplinary approaches or transdisciplinary science. So we shared in the chat a link where you can join the Menti method. You can click that link or go to www.menti.com and introduce the code that is also in the chat. I will just share my screen now. Okay, here we are. We have this question for you. And if you click on the link of Menti that we have in the chat, you would see this question also in your screens. What are the keywords coming to your mind when thinking about transdisciplinary science? All of you can introduce 1 up to 3 words when you think about transdisciplinary science, and then we will share all of this. Oh, there are some of your answers. When we think about transdisciplinary science, we think about innovation, co-development, agility, learning from each other. That's wonderful. Open science, stakeholders, engagement, of course, co-production, collaborative work, collaboration, different actors. Please keep going. Coupled systems, societal stakeholders, engagement, I'm thinking of this, co-development, multi-stakeholder cooperation. This is very important for us to start with this, just to start thinking about how we practice transdisciplinary approaches or sciences, even when we don't name our practices as transdisciplinary. Most of people who are in this room, I think, are interested in these approaches, in these practices. That's why we wanted to hear and read from you what are those ideas, those words, those practices being applied by all of you. And now we will hear from our speakers how they are applying transdisciplinary approaches to their projects, research projects, to their funding schemes and funding programs, and also other initiatives they have in the daily life, but also as part of the professional development. Thanks, Brian. Then back to you.
All right, thank you, Fanny, for running that exciting Menti. And I'm really glad that everyone participated. And we have a lot of common ideas and common concepts on what transdisciplinary research and even the transdisciplinary process and what it means. As Fanny said, the next session, we're going to dive a little deeper into, with our panelists, to think about the different levels of how the transdisciplinary process can affect at the institutional level. And then next, we'll talk about it from a research and a stakeholder engagement level. And for those who are joining today, I see the numbers have changed. My name is Brian Lung. I'm part of the Belmont Forum Secretariat. And the Belmont Forum is an international funding cohort of people in scientific agencies that tries to tackle global challenges related to global environmental change. And we do this through funding projects around the world. And so, the first person we'd like to introduce today for our session, on talking about the institutional side of the transdisciplinary research process, is Dr. Pat. She is the president of the Thailand Science and Research Innovation Agency, and she is here for us today. It's to share a little bit of her thoughts about the process, and we're excited to hear from her. And so the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us at such a late hour, Pat, and we're excited to hear about what you're doing in Thailand.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to join this interesting forum. So would you please share the screen for me? Yes. Kasana, are you sharing the screen for me? Okay, thank you. So while we are waiting for the screen, let me introduce about Thailand Science Research and Innovation quite a bit. In the year 1999, Thailand has just transformed the research and innovation system, and TSRI, or Thailand Science Research and Innovation. We used to be a funding agency, but after the reformation of the research system in Thailand. Please check first slide. Yes, we turn to be the policy deployment and budget allocation. Here, Thailand Science Research Innovation is here, and we have the fund that called National Science Research and Innovation Fund. Okay, we allocate budget institutionally to 9 funding agencies. Okay, and we also allocate budget to about 180 organizations like universities, research institutes, and ministries department. And the next slide, please. Before we allocate budget, first of all, we set up a National Science Research and Innovation Plan. We have 4 strategies: competitiveness, green, science infrastructure, and brain power. In the case of inclusiveness and green, we try to adopt or promote the TDR or transdisciplinary research as an important approach to solve many problems in the rural area, particularly number 4, to promote area-based research that meets the local demand. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we talk about area-based collaboration research, I think we may think about 2 approaches. On the left-hand side, we call community-based research, or CBR. The right-hand side is CIGUS model, CIGUS. The difference between this model is that for community-based research, we use this approach to promote or to empower the local community by supporting villagers to be the owners of the projects. Work with them to analyze the situation and finding the solution collectively. So community-based research, community people or villagers are the key actors. On the right-hand side, we have CIGUS model. And in the CIGUS model, we promote collaboration between communities and the government agencies by having universities as intermediaries. Next slide, please. Okay, this is for the CIGUS model. And you can see that we have communities and industries beneficiaries from the research projects. And we have a university as an intermediary, that the university needs to work with the communities and also the government agencies and civil society in the rural area. And in CIGUS model, we try to promote 5 big agendas according to their situation, like income objectives on the income promotion, on health promotion, environmental promotion, education, and others. Societal problems, including culture and history and local wisdom. Okay, next slide, please. What I would like to focus here is the community-based research. Okay, with community-based research process, or CBR process, we start from planning, implementation, and learning. And on the right-hand side, you can see that key actors in these models, first is villagers, who turns to be local researchers. Okay. And to work with the villagers, our funding agency will support coach and also advisors. Advisors can be academic advisors, either from universities or from government agencies in that area. But the key actors is villagers work closely with coach. Some types of coach can be universities, lecturers, or even from a civil society, okay, from NGOs who, they volunteer to work with the researchers, and funding agency will support them to work with researchers. And by doing that, they help researchers to make a project proposals, and funding agency will support the budget for movement. The next slide, please. I think this is the CBR project. We start with getting the community ready and identify research problems. This will start with coach and villagers to work together to do a kind of identify research problems. We use participation process, engagement, and empowerment. During the process, we use a data collection because data can be something that villagers normally may not very systematic on doing that, but with coach and start make them collecting some simple data, and so that they can analyze their situation better. Okay, from doing that, after have data collection, they start planning for action plan. And in this process, the coach will link with some advisors who can be academic advisors or the advisors from government agencies. And it depends on the problem that they are doing, which types of advisors will coming in. So finally, they will have coach, villagers, and advisors working together for planning and action plan. And actually, the co-creation of knowledge happen not only at the process of planning for action, but actually it starts from identifying research problems. Co-creation of knowledge can start, getting started from that point. In the process of data collection and data analysis, we have a kind of sharing of understanding how to understand data and what the data tell us. And also in the process, we can introduce, villagers can introduce indigenous knowledge to try to set up the action plan to solve the problem. Okay, so after they get the budget and doing a kind of action plan to solve the problem, we use the learning process all along the way to have discussion between the researchers, coach, and then academic advisor. What we find is that even though the project stopped, villagers themselves can gain a kind of self-confidence. They can learn that data information in the village, if they can do it systematically, they can have a data analysis, and those kind of collective action among villagers and with coach and with government agencies can be a collective way to try to solve the solution. So even the project stopped, the coach going out, but the villagers can work with government agencies in the area, continue and continuingly. And from our experience is that even the project stopped, but because the villagers can have a capacity to analyze themselves and to design some way to solve the problem. In that case, government agencies outside will coming in without the coach. I mean, the villagers can get further budget to support for them to doing a kind of activities to solve their problem. So, for example, they start with water solving solution, but after the project finished and capacity to analyze, to understand, and collectively within the village may introduce government agencies from other departments to going in and using some kind of collective action among villagers to solve other problems. For example, start from water, but they can continue other project with other government agency to solve health problem or education problem. So the villagers themselves have a learning process among them. And I think the learning process is something very important when we talk about transdisciplinary research, but this can do it or managed by villagers themselves. So, and in the process of movement, not only research development, but villagers also can use social movement and communication together with the research development to continue their process, their projects and other projects. Okay, and for our experience, an example is about water management that quite successful in Thailand, community-based tourism that villagers can design their own management for their location, and pro-poor education, where villagers can think about the appropriate education method or means for their own children. The next slide, please. I think what is important is here, the 3 points that I learned from our support of community-based research for almost 20 years. First of all, you need to believe that research is a learning process for everyone. And with the learning process, then the learning can raise capacity. So we use research method as a way to raise capacities of villagers. Secondly, to building trust that villagers can do meaningful research with appropriate support. And the third one is that to provide opportunities for villagers to integrate new knowledge and local wisdom for changes. I think these are the 3 success factors for transdisciplinary research, where we have villagers as the key actors in the process. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, and I think this we also try to support academic advisor or academic researcher to join and work with the villagers by trying to get a kind of academic reward, academic career path for those who work with villagers in this area. Normally, researchers maybe use their own research methodology, but this approach, we use a mixed method with the villagers' indigenous knowledge. Okay, and we provide what we call Research and Innovation Utilization Promotion Act to support, to provide incentive to researchers who generate technologies that can be transferred and create impact to local community. Okay. Yeah, I think that's all for the first round, and I would like to share with you what we have as an experience in Thailand. Okay, thank you. Actually, we have many cases, but I just make it a kind of a framework that we have done from our experience and have a conclusion, and hope we can have a linkage in this approach further. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful overview of what TSRI is doing. I like how you broke it down to what the villagers were doing and how you interact with the villagers, providing them opportunities for training, support through coaching. And on the other side, you have the mother model, the SIGUS model, which I think is really fascinating. The 2 arms of how TSRI approaches transdisciplinary research. Changing gears to going at the institutional level, looking at the transdisciplinary process. We have Hugh Johnson from Drexel University right next door, where I'm based in Washington, D.C. Over to you, Hugh.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and thank you to the Belmont Forum for having me. I am the Senior Director of Research, Development and Strategy at what's called the Environmental Collaboratory at Drexel University. So I've been at Drexel in research development roles for a while now, but the collaboratory we just launched about 1.5 years ago. I don't know, Fanny, can you, sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties, so there we go. Thank you very much. So the Environmental Collaboratory is situated in the Provost Office of Drexel University, and Drexel is in Philadelphia in the US. And I think, you know, despite my talk is about a specific institution in our work, I think you are going to hear a lot of similar kind of methods and elements and challenges that we just heard from TSRI from a funding perspective. And like I said, so we're centrally located in the provost office, and our role is really to bring all the expertise from across the university, from all disciplines, in service of communities, specifically to implement a just climate transition through an environmental justice lens. And our model is really to co-design, co-implement, and co-fund with our community partners. And by co-fund, I mean our funding model is specifically designed to be able to provide pass-through funds to our community-based partners and external partners, really in as flexible a way as we can, whether that's to support staff time or hire new staff, really to build capacity so they can have an equal place at the table with us in designing research questions and developing the research with us. Next slide, please. So one of the first things, so as I said, the Environmental Collaboratory at Drexel is only a little over a year and a half old. And one of the first things that we were invited to join in kind of our startup phase was something called the Green Living Plan for Philadelphia. We are actually, this November, we'll be having a mayoral election in Philadelphia. And the Green Living Plan was a coalition of 15 community-based organizations and environmental NGOs across the city that really wanted to set out essentially a roadmap for investment and research needs that were really based on community priorities for whoever the next incoming mayor is. And so we really wanted to look at how could we identify communities that have been the most disinvested, are facing the highest cumulative burdens, and how do we incorporate them into the research process in order to find solutions that work specifically for their communities. Next slide, please, Fanny. So as part of that process, so the collaboratory and our colleagues at the Academy of Natural Sciences at Drexel was providing technical analysis and data mapping for the Green Living Plan, which is a platform in itself. And so we created a environmental justice index specific towards Philadelphia. So some of these elements are things that you'll see in a lot of EJ screening tools. But we also incorporated a lot of data that was more granular than the census tract level, which a lot of environmental justice screening tools in the US is on nationally available census tract data. So we combined that along with additional parameters, data that we had available to us in Philly specifically about neighborhoods. And you can see this included several additional health parameters, also things like tree cover, canopy, proximity to green space. And this was also done in consultation with communities to talk about what their priorities were when it comes to climate resilience and a just climate transition. So you can see the gray area. If we move to the next slide, please, Fanny. Thank you. So on the left, if you're familiar, this is the White House's Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. And as you can imagine, this is a screening tool that is utilized for potential awardees of the various sources of funding under the Justice 40 program in the current administration, whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act or the Infrastructure Bill or the CHIPS Act. And you'll see on the left, based on national data, largely all of Philadelphia would qualify for particular funding under Justice 40 for environmental benefits. And this includes actually, very, affluent business districts and neighborhoods within the city because they qualify for things like proximity to a Superfund site and that sort of thing. But what we did is, like I said, we combined with community input and using community relevant and community provided data, rather than just having, essentially a map that would show you justification for equally spreading out funding, identifying high priority areas that have suffered the most disinvestment or the most overburden from cumulative impacts, and really start thinking what some of the priorities are for those communities. And so really we're thinking about this from a transdisciplinary way is like, one neighborhood's issue, community's issue might be heat, right? But that is a very multifaceted issue. It could be from tree canopy cover to inside the home, whole home renovations, the difference between renters and owners when it comes to electrification, weatherization. How do we solve those, research those issues from an economic standpoint, from a social standing standpoint, from chronic disinvestment standpoint? Next slide, please, Fanny. And so this kind of mapping exercise really informs a lot of the work that we are thinking about at the Environmental Collaboratory and how we work with our community partners to really drive systemic change. So when we say climate transition, we really think about that broadly, right? I think we think about things like poor housing quality, violence, food poverty, energy burdens. All of these things come into account and have to be met from a systemic level before you talk about climate mitigation or climate resilience. And so, as you saw from those maps, it really brings home the point that these need to be deeply on the ground researched projects that are community specific. Our goals for our work is that it really helps build capacity and network building of the community-based organizations we're working with. And then also, I think specifically something that US institutions of higher education have not always weighed into traditionally is really documenting barriers and best practices and how those relate to policy recommendations and not simply just research questions. And then also, as the previous presentation noted, this real need for follow-on funding after the project is over, whether that be through communication campaigns to really affect change and policy going forward. Next slide, please. So out of that came our first project, which is very local, but I think could be, will be, our goal is to expand this, is something we're calling the Philadelphia Climate Justice Collective. So these are 5 community-based organizations that were all partners with us in the Green Living Plan. And each of these organizations represent distinct geographical communities within Philadelphia. They each have their own distinct needs when it comes to climate transition and climate resilience. And really, while the overall goal of the project is to help each community identify, prioritize, and identify next steps for climate, we are meeting them, where they're at, and really including their expertise in what's going on in their neighborhoods and the needs that they have, and funding the activities that are relevant to their community. So, for instance, the Mantua Civic Association, the second one from the left, has been running for multiple years a youth ambassador and educational program. And so their work is really focused on green space and its role in anti-violence in their neighborhoods, and also, just overall climate benefits. Whereas Esperanza, for instance, a completely different neighborhood, one of the most heat-burdened neighborhoods in Philadelphia, are using project support to both expand and ramp up an environmental steering committee, which again are looking at historical issues like lack of tree canopy, but also, again, what's going on inside the home between renters and homeowners and options available for reducing energy burden. And this is all, I think our work, we've realized, has to be really, really intentional. And it works at a different pace, this community-based work, than just traditional project-based research. Can you go to the next slide, please, Fanny? And so one of the first things we did, and I think, the things you're going to see on this slide are pretty straightforward and in many times fairly obvious, but we spent time co-developing and listening to these principles with which community-based partners expect us to hold ourselves as an institution of higher education to. And I think what really comes out here is kind of the point that traditional project-based funding for research projects, even when it's in adequate amounts, which oftentimes it's not, still is not well aligned with true community-based work, especially work that's co-developed and co-owned. And so there's multiple other elements, like building the support and infrastructure for sustaining the work after the project, And also one thing we've heard over and over again is, kind of what can we do, whether it's workforce development, whether it's training opportunities, direct financial support, kind of building that bench of who will come up next to these community-based organizations and replace the current leaders who can still bring that local knowledge and expertise for their communities. And then next slide, please, Fanny. And then lastly, another thing is these kind of the specific scopes of work of this project we're looking at. Another thing we found crucially important to this work, and really something that our community-based organizations brought up, what they call an idea. We started off talking about how do we do data protection, data sharing, co-ownership. And from their point, they really think about this as data sovereignty, right? So these are just some highlights from kind of a draft document that we're currently working on, but this idea of, each of us, universities and communities, we bring our own sets of data to the table. What's co-owned, what won't be co-owned as part of the project. Also for privacy reasons, or for, what data needs to be anonymized, what data is completely shared. And particularly this is coming into play because we have included a robust kind of project evaluation and outcomes, as well as network analysis, which will be provided and is specific to both each of our community-based partners, and then also to the project as a whole, with this whole learning cohort of community-based projects. So really defining upfront who owns the data, who can use the data for what purposes, and making sure that as a university, we are making sure that the data is openly available to our partners, and moving forward, they have the right to do with that data what they want. And so I will finish there and take questions when the time comes.
Thank you so much, Hugh, for giving us a great overview of what's going on at Drexel and especially at the Environmental Collaboratory. What I found really fascinating in terms of both yours and Pat's approaches to transdisciplinary at the institutional and at the government level is how much similarity was, especially when it comes to the ownership of the data and all that. And I love that it's a common theme. And also the whole idea of having a coach for in the villages example, as well as a the steering committee. It's the ideas and principles are very similar. So now we're in this. So for everyone who's here in the audience, thank you so much for joining. If you're jumping in for the first time or chiming in, my name is Brian Lung. I'm one of Belmont Forum Secretariats, and today you are here because we're talking about the transdisciplinary process and how we're going to look at the institutional side, at the government and academia, compared to the research side, and comparing and contrasting the two and finding similarities among all process of the research process. And at this particular point, we are going to go into a brief Q&A with our two panelists. I think to start off the conversation, remember, please put your questions into the chat if you have any questions you'd like to bring up. But for the meantime, I'm going to start the conversation with some of the questions that I think I personally have, such as, how did you engage with the societal actors in the villages or even in the community? What was the first process of the step that you had to take? Because usually the first step is the hardest, I feel like, and understanding how to sensitively get in and go work with the community. Because at first I would see it from their end that I don't know these people, and why should I trust them? It'd be great to have your views and thoughts on that. And let's say, Pat, do you want to start off first? You seem to be nodding a lot.
Okay, I think you asked a very, hit the point question. The first step, which is quite difficult, is how to enter into the village and they trust you that they are going to work with you. So what we can do is that, first of all, we may have a kind of talk and discussion, but before doing that, we may visit some village headman okay, or some people that you know that the villagers will trust on him. Just talk to that key person first, introduce yourself, and let's say what you are going to do. It's not just to do research for your own paper, but it's a kind of research that kind of things that you would like to share your experience on research to villagers so that they can solve some important problems. But anyway, it means that you may start with finding the rough problem of them first. Okay, for example, we know that this village has a problem of water management, water pollution, whatever. Then talk with the village headman, or sometimes it's the informal, not village headman in that village, but the people in that village may trust in some other wise man in the village. You just talk to him and to understand what is going on and how can you work with the villagers. Okay, and after that, when we start talking with villagers, I think information or data is important. Let them talk about their own problem. Sometimes we start with talking with them about their local history. And villagers, particularly the old people, may be the one who quick responds to you, and they're very happy to tell you the story of the village. And finally, leads to the problem that they are confronting. And then this is the starting point that we have set to do a kind of data analysis with the villagers. Okay, start from their local history, start from their local wisdom, and let talk or discuss about the problem that they are confronting, what are really the root cause, and some information that may make them understand together. Sometimes they start the problem, for example, that water pollution is because from our experience, because of this, of that. But after talking with them, asking some question and see the side with them, your analysis sometimes leads to the different research question from what they understand is the root cause. Okay, so by doing that, you may build trust, and then that's the starting point that you can do. Okay, and data can tell themselves. Okay, and listen to the villagers as much as possible, and help make, how to say, use your analytical skill to talk and explain and let them see in other possibilities that you may do with that problem. Okay. And but it takes some time, it's quite a long time actually, before they can trust and talk to you what is the real problem. And sometimes the problem is mixed between, how to say, physical problem or social or relationship problem or something like that. It's mixed up. And this is the way that you need to clarify one by one and start with some really key research question, just a mix-up question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hugh?
Yeah, it's hard to add too much else. I really got all the main elements. I think, for us, it's just, it sounds simplistic, but it's definitely meeting communities where they are. And that means weekends and nights, and recognizing that, even people who are senior leaders in their communities, they have day jobs. This is something they do because they are passionate and care about their community. And so it's asking to be, don't ask them to come to campus, visit them where they are in their communities, be willing to go at nights, on weekends. As Pat was saying, I think especially those first few meetings, you really you listen, and you listen to what their concerns and things are. And I think, one important element is also, someone told me once, is to make sure to ask what's going right in their community as well, and not always just ask what issues they're facing, but really just letting people talk about, as Pat said, oftentimes the people, especially initially you're talking to, are people who have lived in the community for a really long time, and just hearing their experience and history of living there and hearing about how things have changed. You oftentimes glean much more information than asking direct questions that you think are like getting at the answers that you need in order to be helpful. And also, which we, when we work with these community-based organizations all the time, they're the first to tell us, even though they're embedded in the community, they are not, communities are not homogeneous. They are not the sole voice of communities. And so while they're oftentimes the entry point to a community, you have to let them invite you in and interact with their community in the way that they preserves their reputation, integrity, and relationship with the community as well. So it really is just about asking to be invited in. And then also, as you saw in those principles, I think it's the continuing to show up and to be willing to put in a lot of that planning time before you even start to get to what are the questions.
I love how there's so much similarity, especially in that last part you're talking about the planning time. It's almost as though it's like sharing what the vision of what the future could be based off the data that Pat was talking about, how the villagers would own their data and then talk about with the specialists and the subject matter experts. This is where we could go with it. What works best for you type of conversation. The next question I'm going to ask comes from the audience. If also for the audience, just to remind you, if you don't feel comfortable publicly writing your question into the chat, feel free to send it to Fanny Ramos-Quispe. She is one of the Belmont Forum secretariats, and she can help you compile the questions. So that's also a possibility, or you can just direct message me too. I'll also look at it. And so the next question comes from the audience, and they're much more tailored, and I think I want to dive into it a little more. The first one is for Pat, and the second one for Hugh, and then we'll have to move onwards. The first one for Pat is, you mentioned religion as a key aspect when doing science. Can you dive into that a little bit more? Why religion with the villagers? And can you give a flagship project?
I see. I think I mentioned about the village headman, that or some wise man in the village that people trust and believe in him or in them. Okay, but the topic may start with not probably because of my poor English, not always mean religion, but we can start with something like, for example, some culture, some way of thing or way of life that they used to have an experience, and the community normally change fast. So you may talk about the history of the community. You start with something. This is probably characteristic of Thai villages. We have both old villages and new village. When we talk about their village, how the history of the village, then you can start with some conversation and sharing with them what happened to your village from in the past up to now, and the situation changed, and what's happened and why it's happened like that. Okay, and in this way, we can understand some of the root cause of the problem, because in Thailand, many of the villages used to be prosperous, a lot, plenty of water, of green or whatever, but because of development, start changing and cause some trouble to villagers who cannot adjust to the new situation, or sometimes they are in the situation that resource will exploit it because of outsiders, something like that. So by talking to them about what happened in the past up to the present time, then you can get some information from that history, what are going on, and sometimes you understand the relationship of people in the village. So by doing this, you can know who else that you are going to collect their interest to join with your project. So I mean, we need a team. For example, we have about 20 villages, 20 households in the village, but you may start with only 5 households who are interested to join the project and want to solve the problem by themselves with you. in that case. So I think history of the villages are important, and so that you can understand physical relation among them as well, and also to understand their culture or way of life, so that you can design what kind of activities that you are going to introduce when you start doing the project. For example, we have an example in the village who how to say, in their village they have seawater and fresh water. It's the place where seawater and fresh water meet, and normally this kind of area is very prosperous with natural resources. Okay, but when we have development project coming in, so the fresh water turned to be polluted, and the seawater also dirty, something like that. So the prosperities of the village declining. Okay, in that case, you know that the way to solve the problem, you talk with some academics, you know that probably they need how to say water gate to prevent seawater, or to prevent polluted fresh water or something like that. And from doing this, you start talking with villagers about how to design it. And from our experience, actually villagers understand the situation better than an engineer, because they're living there for quite a long time. So they know the period when the fresh water come or when the seawater come. So let them think together how to design, and they can use some indigenous knowledge rather than using cement. They use a tree or whatever to design their water gates. But with your new knowledge, you can encourage them to use the similar model, but rather than using wood, you may use some other thing that is more permanent. For example, cement, but with the better water gate system, something like that, but mixed with new knowledge and indigenous knowledge to design it. Okay, and try, let them try it with your research budget to doing that. Okay, but when we start doing this at the beginning, we invite also the people from irrigation department to join, that the people from irrigation department who has the role to take care of this water system in the village, they do not trust the villagers. They said, no, the irrigation department has their own model. Blueprint, use this model everywhere in Thailand, something like that. But actually it's not work with the village here, where we have fresh water and seawater going high and low, high and low. So we encourage the irrigation department to trust and to try with the villagers. And the model of villages has proved that it can manage water system better than the irrigation department model. So finally, irrigation department, they changed their policy. From now on, when you start doing a water gate in the village, let's talk with the villagers. Let them help to design, work with the villagers to design the water gate system, something like that. It needs not to be one blueprint, but the model that can be adjusted with the villagers' indigenous knowledge and something like that. So this is from our experience that we have doing. Yeah.
That's really cool. That's very exciting how that happened and how it all comes together. For Hugh, quickly, can you share an example of how you manage data to ensure sovereignty for all the stakeholders and who are part of the collaboratory? I presume it comes down to the word equity, data equity.
Yeah, I mean, in the simplest sense, so universities are a bureaucracy, and so we've been found very receptive. Took a standard subaward agreement, and we've been working to modify that for community-based organizations, recognizing the fact that they don't have legal counsel on staff, that some of those sorts of things, and really just change the actual data ownership language directly in the subcontract itself. but also I think, it's some of the things, but it's also just, I think specifically, I mean, just having those conversations directly with the CBOs and acknowledging that there is a data ownership issue. Obviously, as a university, we have, even when it's not a federally funded project, because we receive federal funding, we have things about things like data retention and things like that. So it's really just directly addressing the data ownership issues and making sure that, I think oftentimes we put the onus on our community-based partners to reject elements of, say, a subaward or a contract. And what we're trying to do is proactively present subaward agreements, contractual agreements that match what we're telling them we want to have happen in terms of co-ownership and co-development of data, and making sure that they have the capacity to understand what's in those contracts and their legal rights and obligations to data that is co-developed.
Wow, thank you for that description of how the process of, well, not just legal side of data, but also the contract on the award side of the data, in terms of how it's, and understanding that, how does it put this, like data, legal equity, legal literacy behind understanding the data sovereignty. I'm gonna pitch and switch gears now. Thank you so much, Pat and Hugh. If you can stick around for our later end, we're gonna bring everyone together. For those who've just chimed in today and joined our discussion on transdisciplinary approaches across multiple regions of the world, we are going to switch now. We first talked about institutions and how they apply the transdisciplinary process. Now we're going to switch into the research side. Our first speaker is Laila Sandroni. She's from Brazil, and she does a lot of transdisciplinary work and down there. I'm gonna pass the floor to her and have her give a little bit of her insights. Over to you, Laila.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Fanny, for inviting me to be here. I already learned a lot, so I'm really grateful to be here in this panel with Pat and Hugh, and I am really eager to hear also what Judith has to share with us. I'm going to share my screen. It's interesting to be here in the transition part between the institutional and the research practice, also because I've been on both sides, right? So I'm going to try to develop here in my presentation these two acts and these two facets of being involved in transdisciplinary research, from being a transdisciplinary researcher and then transitioning into the institutional level in trying to bring to the table possibilities for other researchers to apply a transdisciplinary approach to their lives and work. So I've been a transdisciplinary researcher since the beginning of my career, since like scientific initiation, but I didn't use the name transdisciplinary research to what I did. I just was passionate as a young researcher about how what I was doing and what was being produced in terms of scientific input could have an actual impact in people's lives and people's, well, I live in Brazil, one of the biggest inequality rates of the world. And I was always passionate about how we could work towards changing this reality. And as the work of the collaborator in the US shows really clearly, the inequalities have a really big effect in how people relate to environmental issues and problems, and how they have resilience towards facing global environmental change, such as climate change, but also biodiversity loss, disaster risk management, and so on. So when I did, throughout my career, I was always engaged with local communities and trying to develop research that was impactful. When I reached my postdoc, I was actually aware that what I was doing was transdisciplinary research. My postdoc was a project entitled Towards Convivial Conservation. Here in Brazil, I was funded by the funding agency from São Paulo. And it was a part of a Belmont Forum call that was called Transformations to Sustainability, which had the North Face as one of the main funders. The project was developed in 4 countries simultaneously, and we were looking at how local communities dealt with the relationships with big apex predators and how we could develop ways of co-developing management of the protected areas so that this relationship could be less conflictual and more prosperous for the local communities. So we have worked between human-wildlife interactions with the grizzly bears in the US, the jaguars here in Brazil, the wolves in Finland, and the lions in Tanzania. And I was responsible for developing and managing the project here in Brazil with the jaguars. So I'm not going to get into that much of the international relations component of the work, since we are looking at the transdisciplinary component of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the challenges and opportunities that came about in the project in Brazil. So we were about 10 scientists and 6 non-academic stakeholders just in the Brazilian team. And we were working together towards recognizing better paths for prosperous human-wildlife interactions between local communities and the jaguars in 3 specific spots in the Atlantic rainforest. And our expectation was that we could build a path. It's water. We know that it won't be easy to build a path, but we had an expectation that we could build a linear path towards the other side of the road, where we could stand with a concrete policy results and everything would be beautiful, and the communities could have all that they needed to develop good relationships with the jaguar and their properties. But that's not really what happened. We had many issues to solve in a short amount of time. The budgeting process for the proposal was not really that well fit to all the challenges that we needed to solve. So the reality of the project looked more like the picture that you see on the right. We could pave some parts of the way, but a lot of the work remained undone. And we needed to follow up to build other projects that we could fulfill the other parts that could not be done in the framework of that project. So just to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities that came out, the process of having a stakeholder map was really important to generate a common ground. I know that Pat and Hugh have, I'm sure that they have also faced this kind of challenge, but this was not highlighted in their speeches today. One thing that's pretty complicated also in transdisciplinary research is that before you go towards recognizing the stakeholders that should be involved in the project, you have to generate a common ground within the team of the project, because you have already in the team, ideally at least, you have already in the team non-academic stakeholders and scientists from different disciplines that have different views on the methods, epistemology, and so on, worldviews. So you have to build a common ground within the team before you actually have the contact and the process with the local communities. So the stakeholder mapping process that was planned to be something that we could do in the scoping workshop phase in the first week of the project was something that took us 4 months to do, because it generated and triggered a lot of uneven knowledge within the team that we needed to solve in terms of generating a common ground. So from that stakeholder mapping process, we could develop the research questions and have a common ground to work upon. But instead of doing this in the first week, we took a lot of the budget and the time that we had at our service in the project, much more than originally planned, which is normally the case in transdisciplinary research projects. Just to be aware that not all the researchers that were composing the project had transdisciplinary training since the beginning. So a lot of the work that has to be done was to, as Pat was talking about, the need to coach the local villagers to develop the processes. We need also to coach researchers to be able to work with the policy side and the local villagers. So this is something that was really important to us in our project as well. So some of the challenges that we needed to face were limited time and resources, conflicting priorities and perspectives between among members of the group, and also with the local communities, and overlying power asymmetries that we had to tackle with. For instance, the biological sciences had a bigger weight in the project as a whole, as biological sciences normally do in conservation matters. And we had to leverage that with the social sciences and the local communities' perspectives. Just to offer one example, but there were others that were cross-cutting to the project. And some of the opportunities were that the generation of this common ground for this project was used and is still being used for other processes that are ongoing right now. So this common ground reached way beyond the framework of the project. It generated a lot of innovation for policy, and it built trust and long-standing partnerships with the local communities in both parks that we were working in, that are being used for, that are present for many of the projects that are ongoing right now after the project ended. So as this project was being wrapped up, I was incorporated in the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research, the institute where I work now, and where I lead the main transdisciplinary program initiatives of the institute. So the IAI was created in 1992. Interesting to see that it's not that far away from the date that happened the restructuration of the TSRI. So the late 1990s were a period in time that there were many initiatives in rethinking how we do science, right? And the idea was to develop transboundary collaborations between the countries in the Americas to face global change. 30 years have passed, and now the Institute works towards transformation to sustainability, works with transdisciplinarity, science policy interface, and science diplomacy as key aspects of our work in the region. I'm not going to get into how the IAI works. I'm just going to give specific examples on how we're doing training and capacity building. So when I joined the IAI, I came as a researcher with the experience of doing transdisciplinary science to develop training activities so that people that are either funded by the IAI or part of the IAI community could develop their own abilities and capacities to apply a transdisciplinary perspective to their research. So I'd like to highlight the STEP Fellowship Program that me and Brian and Fanny here are part of, and I saw Teresa on the audience at some point, and Maria Schmuckler. We are all a part of this community that has a component of transdisciplinary science training. We go through a training process as early career researchers working in different countries in the Americas, and bring this transdisciplinary perspective to our own institutions. As I said, one of the challenges is that we don't have a lot of capacity, at least not here in Brazil for sure, of researchers that are able to talk to and recognize the diverse knowledge systems as of equal value as their own, and work with that to produce actual solutions to the global environmental change problems. So we try to work with that with early career researchers, because we believe that the early career people are the future of our research. And if they receive this training now, when they become senior researchers, they could bring to the table that expertise as well. And another program of the IAI is the Transdisciplinary Academy that hosts training activities for different audiences. I'm going to offer just 2 examples, and we can discuss others if needed. One example was a transdisciplinary program that was coupled with a Belmont Forum collaborative research action called Climate, Environment, and Health 2. We have issued a call for research teams that wanted to apply a transdisciplinary research perspective, but did not have the skills for that. So we had 25 projects that were approved in that call. And we have offered a training, a synchronous online training that culminated with an in-person workshop with those teams. And we have developed with them the capacities that are needed: science communications, dealing with power relations, recognizing diverse sets of knowledge, open data, open source. We have discussed all those issues with them before they actually applied to the Belmont Forum CRA. Some of the teams applied and some of them didn't, but it's the same with the training programs. We want to offer the opportunity for this training to happen. If they're going to use it in this call or in another, this doesn't matter that much. We couple it timely so people can use the information and have a concrete opportunity to do so. But also the training serves as a whole. We also offered short-term training activities in several conferences. We have the names of the ones that we did last year and in the first semester of this year there. And in those short-term training activities, we also offered the key highlights of TD 101 to researchers working in sustainability and global environmental change issues. So I think that was as I needed to share. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you so much, Laila, for giving us a great overview of what you were doing at before at IAI and then now at IAI, and then taking those principles from your wildlife conservation efforts, linking that from science and practice, working with communities to policy changes. Those skills and insights were very valuable at IAI. On next in our conversation, we have Gildas, who is also a Belmont Forum researcher. And Gildas, I'm going to pass the floor to you. Talk about your efforts in the arms restore in the coral reefs. Over to you.
Thank you, Brian, and hello, everyone. Thanks for my colleagues for the great presentations. That I'm happy that I passed as the last, because I think it's a continuation of what they've just explained. Before I start, I'm Gildas, so I'm a senior researcher at the University of Drexel from Madagascar. And I would like to note that I have my colleague, PI of the project, Arms Restore Project, who is in the audience too, so he might be participating in the Q&A after this. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe let me start with some context point and and the main challenges we were facing through this to make this project on arms restore. We all know the great value of the coral reefs or for the human being in terms of coastal protection, health, and especially food production through fisheries. But also, we know that the coral reefs are globally under threat with an unprecedented degradation of these very important habitats. So the question is, can we push reefs back to their better health states, which was before? So our project, the Arms Restore project, is a research project that aims to use the arms as a new tool to restore coral reef biodiversity, fisheries yields, and human health and well-being. And the arms is in fact a standardized 3D collectors of marine life that have been adapted to a local context for our project. So instead of using a PVC arms, which is the standard material that is used for this research tool, we worked with the community to fabricate limestone pyramid ones with materials that are found locally, because the PVC ones is very expensive first, but also very hard to find, and we couldn't even find them in Madagascar, how to build them here. So that is also why we switched to the limestone pyramid ones. So hundreds of these arms are seeded to a healthy reef to collect the biodiversity. Then after a year or more, they will be moved to stone aggregation artificial reefs that will be installed in sites that are chosen with consultation with the communities. And I would like to note here that the communities that we are working with are fishers communities in the southwest Madagascar, which is the most where you have the most number of fishers in Madagascar, traditional fishers. And here we hypothesize that placing the seeded arms on the new artificial reefs will increase the biodiversity and consequently, of course, the fishery yields in the villages where we work for that. And I think there are two questions that are important around the project. Can build reefs, artificial reefs, supplement fisheries and improve health? That is the first question. So the basic science question is also, does more habitat produce more fish or only aggregate fish? And to answer these questions, we have to perform a comprehensive research program that around the artificial reefs seeded with the arms. Indeed, for example, to choose the most suitable site for where to build the artificial reefs, we are collaborating with colleagues who are oceanographers and benthic mapping specialists using cutting-edge tools like drones and satellite image that can give us very high resolution, up to 1 centimeter resolution benthic maps, which is a very useful and very new recent technology. The ecology team where I belong, for example, looks for the impacts of the arms that are used here to the impacts of the arms on increasing the biodiversity, while the fishery team surveyed the increase or not in fisheries yields of the artificial reefs and arms that we are using. And moreover, we have also a human health and nutrition team that surveyed the well-being aspect of the project. So it is a really huge number of team. I will come back to it after, but above all, as stated by my previous colleagues, the community engagement and acceptation is crucial to the success of the project. So we have regular, since the beginning of even before the beginning of the project, we have regular workshops led by the researchers, mainly led by the PhD students, with the support of the well-implemented NGO, which is the main collaborator of the communities in our research zone, which is the Bay of Rano Bay in the southwest Madagascar. And with the participation of an experienced colleague in terms of social communication and organization, we could get signed agreements. Signed agreements are very important. We could get them from all the communities to implement the project. So they accepted that we install the artificial reefs with the new tools in their fishing area, in their fishing zones. And we also got agreements from the environment department of the region, but also from the public administration, the mayor and the chief of villages. In fact, the team of the project is a network of dozens senior researchers of different disciplines from different countries, namely here at Harvard University, for example, from the US, School of Public Health and Organismic Evolutionary Department, and from the French Institute of Research for Development, who are working a lot in Madagascar and having skills in terms of fishery monitoring, from Swedish Institute of Ecological Economics and the Stockholm University, but also from University of Miami, and of course from the University of Tuliar, Madagascar, where the whole team, field team is based. We also have many graduate and undergraduate students, mainly Malagasy, but also Swedish, American students. Like we have, for example, been hosting 6 global sustainability scholarship fellows from the USA during the 2 last years. And this is a great opportunity for the students to share experiences and to learn from different cultures. The project not only meets collaboration between individuals, actually, but clearly a formal cooperation of scientists from around the world throughout the Belmont Forum, which is, by the way, a great network of research. It is also important to state that our work from community, our work follows from community decisions, and these communities includes marine farmers, fishers, and women associations. And in fact, that decisions was the starting place of the project, and now we as scientists, we are making it our goal to help them to succeed. But it wouldn't be effective without cooperating with the other stakeholders in the area, from the private sectors working on community-based fisheries and community-based aquaculture, which are very developed here in Madagascar, and restoration actors such as NGOs or associations, and especially the public authorities such as the fisheries and environment and health services for our case here. That form of cooperation is not only a must, but also open opportunities to raise funding for more active restoration activities and building more and larger artificial reefs, for example, since we are talking about artificial reefs. And I think I have come to the end of my presentation. I hope I've shared some interesting information for the audience, and yeah, I'll be happy to answer some questions or to note comments from you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gildas, for giving us an overview of what you're doing in the reefs. And I love how that it's the choice between the PVC and the concrete was made in a very smart and regional way with the community, and how that is integrated with the community, and working with them, sharing that knowledge, and the whole cycle of from making the decision that came from the scientists, went to the community, and the community made the decisions and went back to the government. It's a whole network. It's a common theme that we see all across the board. Again, for those who are just joined, I see the numbers change. My name is Brian Lung. I'm one of the Belmont Forum Secretariats. We're breaking the session up into two parts. The first part is looking at the institutional side. Now we're looking at the researcher side, how they apply the transdisciplinary process. This portion for the next few 10 minutes or so, we're going to go into a Q&A specifically with the speakers before we open it up broadly. And just as a reminder for our participants in the audience, if you have a question, please put it into the chat and Fanny will help circulate it. And if you don't feel comfortable putting it publicly, you also can direct message either me or Fanny, who is going to help out. I guess the first question will go to Jildis, if you don't mind. First question is, how hard or easy was it to engage with the government and the private sector, especially when it came to those making those decisions?
Yeah, I think it wasn't that hard. Why? Because we are like, our project is answering the needs that is stated by themselves. So the government is encouraging such kind of projects. So they really like the project. I think even for the private sectors, for example, it's not that hard because they are community-based actors too. So providing solutions to improve the communities, providing solutions to ensure sustainability of the management of the environment, interesting them. So they are really helpful and engaged to the project too. Maybe the hard part of it is, I think the challenge is that such kind of projects to really survey, to really notice, to really have the impact of it, it needs more time, like I would say at least 5 years to be able to really note the impact of it. And most of the time, the government and of course the communities want result and want impacts right now after like a year. So how to explain to them that this is something that needs time to be clearly be efficient and have impact in their fisheries and income, and that is maybe one of the biggest challenge of the project. And I think the other challenge is also that the more we move forward into the activities, the more we need involvement from other disciplines. For example, I was talking about colleagues from oceanography, from mapping and everything. We didn't include them. We had only 3 teams at the beginning: ecology, fishery, and human health. But while we move forward, we think, okay, this is a huge project, installing 6-hectare artificial reef. So if we put it anywhere, if the choose of the site is not correctly done, that might be very difficult. So that's why we ask the people, okay, let's help us to choose the sites using oceanographic data, mapping, and everything. So and it brings the funding and timeline issues too. So the challenge is more about that. Timeline and funding, but also the will of the community to get impact as soon as possible. Yeah.
Thank you, Jildis. For the next question, I'm going to ask this to Laila. So one of the beautiful things I saw about your presentation was a link between how the engagement in the beginning, you need to build that trust. And that was a common theme that was in the beginning section when I talked to Pat and Hugh. But this time, this trust was a little different. It was a stakeholder mapping to give a sense of transparency, especially this in the particular animal conservation efforts. It was not just within a country or within a city. It was transboundary, transnational, across continents. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the science diplomacy end of things, especially on how you're able to build that trust, build that transparency so you can move forward.
So just to comment that I agree with Jildis. I think that 5 years is a pretty good time frame to start, because well, that's a pretty important aspect of the whole process. The stakeholder mapping started as a way of identifying the other stakeholders and the other people that should be involved in the project, right? But once we started looking at that as a thing that was composed by conservation biologists, people from the anthropology, geography, GIS, people that had different backgrounds, we started to notice that we didn't identify the same people as the parties that should be interested in the project, right? Some people went more to the conservation NGOs as the preferable non-academic partners. Some people went to the governments as the preferable partners for the project, some people to the local communities. And then we had to mix and match those expectations to move forward with the project in a successful way. And this had to be done for each case study in each of the 4 countries, right? And then we had to develop workshops throughout the process so we could exchange ideas among the different working teams that were working in the different areas. And also to remind that I always try to use the name human-wildlife interactions, but in this case, we have a lot of human-wildlife conflict, right? Because we are working with large carnivores, and people are generally afraid of those animals with a reason for that. And since people are afraid, we have to tackle that fear as well as part of our relationships to the communities. And so we started from that thing that was a common thing among our cases, excluding the US, because the grizzly bear is not that present in the regions where they tend to stay inside the forest, right? But in the other cases, with the wolves, the lions, and the jaguars here, they tend to appear in people's properties. Normally when people have chicken and cattle around to feed the animals. And what happened was that through this common theme, we could recognize similarities of things that were being used to tackle that conflict in the different areas, and then start the conversation in this sense of the science diplomacy, in recognizing the relations between the totally different landscapes in the different countries. So this was a really interesting thing to do. You need to find this common ground, and then you need to recognize how these common threads and themes can be used to generate exchanges of experiences in the different places. This was really valuable to the research in our case.
Thanks, Laila, for that overview of how that works. And I presume, Gildas, you also experienced something very similar as well. Do you have any thoughts and comments in terms of other challenges or other opportunities that you saw that were different when working among the reef communities compared to the human and wildlife interactions or now conflict?
Can you say it again? Sorry, Brian.
Sure. In terms of the science diplomacy aspect of how you make up the stakeholder mapping and making sure that every process is transparent so everyone knew what was going on and who the actors were. Was your process very similar? And did you also find the similar challenges or opportunities that were different or similar to Laila's?
No, yeah, great question. I know it was very, very similar. We did the same, and I think that's a key point to ensure that the project is going well too. So yeah, very similar.
Cool. Then the question to Laila, can you share a little bit about your personal transformation when applying transdisciplinary process at the different scales? You mentioned local to international. That's a really great conversation thread line, if I can tease out a little more. And what are the main differences when applying TD?
Yeah, it's really different being a TD researcher on the ground, working with a local community. It's pretty easy to understand how you have to position yourself and recognize the challenges and work with them. It's not easy to solve them, but it's pretty easy to understand what the challenges are and think about the ways to start to tackle them, right? When you pass on to the international level and you try to build common threads in how to help researchers like myself and Gilda's here and everyone else working in Belmont Forum projects, how we can implement funding schemes, processes, calls, training opportunities that help people like me and Gilda's and everyone else in the Belmont Forum community to perform their work in the most impactful way. Because if we are proposing a transdisciplinary project, of course, we already want, as researchers, for our projects to have the most impact possible. But if you see what Pat and Hugh were saying in the beginning from the institutional side, you have to offer coaching opportunities, training opportunities, time, follow-up funding. You have to provide tools so that the researchers can have the best and the highest impacts of their research as possible. Because the good intent to have impact is not enough, right? You will have some impact, but not necessarily the most impact possible from the research that you're doing if you don't have the tools or the resources to do so. So I think that the biggest challenge that we are trying to tackle right now, and that this movement in scale brings to the table, and that we're still trying to recognize ways to deal with it, is to see common threads in experiences such as these and recognize the best tools and capacity building activities that could help people on the ground developing transdisciplinary research deal with them.
Thank you, Lila. And thank you everyone for listening in to our session on the transdisciplinary approaches across scales. And right now at this next section, we're going to bring in all the panelists. So before we had people from governments and institutions, now we're bringing them in and now we just finished and wrapped up our researcher portion of it. For this next part, we're opening up to the audience here. So remember, please put your questions into the chat and to either direct message them to me or to Fanny. But to start off, we had a question that was mentioned in the chat earlier that I want to introduce to all of you and have all of you comment on it. And it is a question related to elite bias. So in this and where this comes providing context to this question, I think it comes from how to ensure the research process ensures inclusiveness and equity and transparency along the way. So I guess, so in other words, the question that was in the chat specifically is, how have you controlled the problem of elite bias, key informants in the research process to ensure inclusiveness? I see, Pat, you raised eyebrows. Do you want to take this one first? Pat, you're on mute.
Sure. Yeah, I think we have three important pillars in doing transdisciplinary research, and maybe to prevent bias and also to develop religious analytical skill. First of all, in our model is villagers are project owners, and let them find their best project leader. And surprisingly, I think villagers are very clever. More or less, they can find the best people who are interested in their own problem and can be a project leader. And this is the first point, is that researchers here is villagers. Okay, so bias or not, it depends on how the discussion process or the learning process is effective or efficient or not. Okay, so secondly is the learning process that coaches involved and coach are trained to use some analytical tools and simple tools. I very much agree with Laila. When I first start talking about when we first enter into the village, we may talk with many people, say something about simple history or whatever. But finally, we have about 7 tools to doing or study or learning with the villagers. And one of the things is what Laila has mentioned about stakeholders mapping. This is one of the key tools before you can do any kind of project. So after you get familiar with the village and the villagers trust you, then you start talking deeper and deeper and use stakeholders analysis and stakeholders mapping in the process. So such a kind of tools are what coach are trained before, and coach are trained to be facilitators in discussion and knowledge management. So coach is not a project leaders, but just supporters. And the third, we use academic advisors from universities or from government agencies to cross-check the issues and give some advice, some comments. So with 3 pillars, villagers, coach, and advisor, I think more or less we can do this kind of projects in balance, and hopefully that all well-trained coach and universities, academic advisors understand that this is the project of the villagers. It's not their own project. So let villagers be the leaders, and just support them to think, to analyze, and to find solution. That is from our experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Julius, I think you want to.
Yeah, I raised my hand because I want to share experience from our team. I didn't talk about it because time not enough. But for example, we at the beginning of the project we did the exhaustive survey of the people in the whole area, in all the villages. Our human health team did a survey asking people characteristics of each household, how many people there, educations and everything, and all the other teams are based on these very comprehensive information about the people can easily sample and select the sampling strategies and how to select the people to interview, or even to the fishers to monitor, to survey. So I think that's a very important point. If it's possible, of course, we worked in an area which is less than an hour travel from the end of it. But yeah, I think if it's possible, that's a good experience that I want to share too. Oops, sorry.
Thank you. Laila?
Yeah, I mean, to respond and to take back what the other panelists said, I think that to avoid elite bias is to try to be aware of it. That's the best that we can do. And we have different sorts of tools to do that. Pat said about the stakeholder mapping. That's what we used in our project as well. You can do a complete survey. You can use an environmental justice index as Hugh does. You can use different sorts of tools to recognize the inequalities and power relations that are present in the context that you're going to approach, right? But you have to be aware of this to use those tools. So you have to bring to any TD project an awareness about you're going to get into a mess that you're not aware of. So you're going to have to analyze all the available data, or even to produce more data about the context that you're going to get into, and try to tackle that dimension of the power inequalities that will be present in the context. And I just want to finish to wrap up this comment with an anecdote from my field trip. When we got to the first park where where we have the most jaguars in Brazil, in the Atlanta forest, the National Park of Iguaçu, the first thing that happened to us is that the biggest farmer of the region came and offered to us to host a workshop in his farm. and offer lunch to everyone and put on everything that we needed, and we could host a workshop. And everyone said, yay, that's great. The community is already involved. And I said, wait, we don't know who this guy is. We need to recognize who is this person inside this community. And then we recognized that he was being sued for slave labor in the region. So just to talk about how things happen in Brazil, that's the sort of things that you need to recognize. We're not aware of the power relations in the place, and we need to try to be as much aware of them as we can as TD researchers on the field. And we didn't do the workshop with that farm, of course.
You.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Layla more, and both everybody. I think awareness, there's tools, as Layla said, but I think awareness is all you can do, because even in marginalized communities, there are elites and not elites, right? And so it can be easy to communicate mostly with the elites, because it increases your chances of maybe not success, but at least outcomes. And so, but then at the same time, you have to think about sometimes communicating directly with the non-elites, even in marginalized communities, exposes them to risks by revealing, their, thoughts and expectations too. So as Layla said, I think it's just awareness and making sure that you're constantly keeping that top of mind, that in any community, there are elites and non-elites, and protecting the integrity of the research and protecting the integrity of those you're working with.
Well, thank you. Next question I want to ask you is, we talked about elite bias, but there's also another slightly different kind of bias that could be generational bias. And this is the reason why I'm diving into this, is because on one hand, from a community leading aspect, in terms of generation wise, elders are seen as the higher, more respectful, but their knowledge is very different. And other communities may not see them the same way. And I was wondering if you have ever approached or talked about it. I know Pat talked a little bit about the elders in the community, and that has a different level and meaning and layer when in the transdisciplinary process. But I was wanting to tap into your thoughts, all of you, on generational bias and building that relationship in the TD process.
I can offer just one comment. It's really contextualized, but here in Brazil, the older generations are, many of them, especially in the rural communities, they don't know how to read, right? So we have many communities where the young people serve as translators in transdisciplinary projects. And it's really important to involve both the elderly and the young people. So you can have these perspectives that are normally the most respected inside the communities from the elderly, but you can have someone that can fully understand them and translate to a more formal perspective, so to speak. It's not really that easy. For instance, in the indigenous communities, many of them don't know how to speak Portuguese, which is the Western language that is present over here. So you need the young people as a bridge to make this translation. So in that sense, they put to the table their own perspectives as well, because in the last 20 years, almost everyone got at least some degree of formal education in Brazil. This is pretty recent. So this is one aspect of intergenerational bias and how it is included in projects.
It's a very good angle. Thank you.
I think it depends on the projects that you are doing as well. In many cases, we may find young people be a secretariat of the group. Engage as secretariat of the group, because they can write, they can summarize, or even can use the computer for reporting, to showing some graphs, some diagram, some pictures that they took from the field, something like that. So they have different role in the group, but whether the young people participate much in discussion, in exchange or not, that depends on the abilities of, depends on the project characteristic, and also the ability of coach as facilitator to encourage young people to talk. But normally in Thailand, I think the number of the research team, young people may be a smaller proportion than the elderly or the middle-aged people. That's depend on the project. But we have some other types of project, for example, for survey of natural resources in the village. In that case, young people, students from schools are very active to join, and they enjoy walking into the forest and start collect some information, something like that. So I think it depends on the type of the project, and probably because of the question or the problem itself, sometimes elderly people concerned with that problem more than the young people. So it depends on the project itself. Yeah.
This.
Yeah. This is a context of here in Madagascar, the communities that we are working with too. But I think it's one of the reason why when we select, interview people, we try to select all the ages, because the elders, they have the aura, or everyone listen to them, they are the wise man, and also they have the knowledge that they get from the the old knowledge, how it happened before, because the world is changing a lot now, and the young people do not know how it happened before that, in terms of even in terms of environmental, but even in terms of relationship in the villages, how the communities work. It is also very changing because of influences from the West. But apart from that, having them both together or interviewed separately is very interesting, because you can find I wouldn't say bias, but the difference between the perception and between the knowledge that they have. So it helps also to understand correctly the situation. But I think one of the challenge, and what we want to change, not want to change, but what we have to understand here too, is more between men and women in terms of gender. For example, if you are meeting with all the people, all the villagers, most of the time women's tends to not to speak, because culturally women doesn't really speak here during meetings in Madagascar. It is changing a lot. It's not illegal to do that right now, but the culture is still heavy sometimes. And how do you involve the women? Sometimes that is sometimes hard, and you as a researcher, as partnering with them, talking with them, you have to understand that, and to try to turn the discussion or to interview the women in different way to make them participating in the decision making. Even if in Madagascar, I want to share that women has their a huge place in decision making in the household, but during meetings it's completely different. Yeah.
Love that dichotomy you present, the gender split. Before I jump to that, I don't know if you want to chime in on the generational aspect, or if you want to just dive right into the gender aspect.
Yeah, the gender aspect it makes a ton of sense. Gilda said it so well. A colleague of mine who's done a lot of peace building work just reinforces everything that everyone else said, is that you need that multi-generational view, but sometimes you need to speak to younger generations separately from older generations, because they don't want to contradict, you know what I mean, more senior people in the room, even though they might see priorities very differently. So that separation, as Gilda said, I think is important, and each situation is going to be culturally different. But
to me, I think that actually, even though the number of young people joining the project is not is a smaller proportion, but I think this is good, particularly when that young generation means somebody who's studying in school or whatever. Because normally when Thai students go to school, they just learn something from outside, but they do not know about their own village. So it's a good way that they learn from their people in the group and learn about their own villages, and they can use some of their basic how to say knowledge like mathematics or whatever to help the analysis in the group. So young people, 1 or 2 is also very effective in joining and make the project more or less lively with the mix with the young generation and the older generation. And as I mentioned, young generation can benefit because they can learn of their own village. Okay. But for women, I don't think in Thailand, as I mentioned, it depends on the project. If the project's about some career, some jobs, some kind of thing like textile, they may have many women join the group. But in some project like water management, there may be male in the group. So we don't see the gender difference in research project. It depends on the project. Okay, that's what I would like to share. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And so with that, I want to thank all our panelists from all around the world across different time zones. I really appreciate all of you joining. I know some of it's really late, some of us really early audiences, same. Really appreciate you staying with us, whether it's early in the morning, late in the evening, or wherever you are around the world. Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to end this session. We had a really good conversation about the struggles in building a transdisciplinary team, how we tackle the transdisciplinary process at the institutional level, all the way down to the research level, not just looking at local regions, not just looking within a country, but also looking at transboundary issues as well, and how we were able to tackle that and dive into the similarities, differences, nuances, different names of vocabulary of different terms. At the end of the day, the concepts are very similar. And I think that's what we wanted to hit home for this message. And so with that, I would like to, again, thank all our panelists, thank the audience for your attention. And hopefully you'll join us for another Belmont Forum SSUNGA session in the near future. Have a great rest of your day or evening.
Thank you.